Some cars are born to be legends. Intensely special machines that are launched to extreme fanfare, with a dedicated following from the day they roll off the production line. Some cars become legends, proving themselves in the arena of motorsport or being great platforms for modification. But some cars? Well, some cars never quite make it. Maybe they don't have the motorsport pedigree. Maybe the driving dynamics just aren't quite good enough to elevate them above the crowd. Maybe they get stuck firmly in something else's shadow. Maybe it's a little bit of everything. So, it's not a legend. And I'm willing to bet that many of you have never even heard of the Mitsubishi Legnum VR-4. So I guess that means it's not worth your time, right? Let's find out. The Legnum VR-4 and the Galant VR-4 for that matter exist in a bit of a weird place in Mitsubishi's lineup in history. The original Galant VR-4 was a rally car. It was a small 4-cylinder 2-litre turbo car that would eventually essentially become the Lancer Evolution. This is not that car. This exists in a time where Mitsubishi already firmly had an Evo in the lineup. So this had to move up market. It got bigger, it got heavier. It got a 2.5-litre V6, went to twin turbo, and in this case, a really big station wagon body. And it feels it. This is not an Evo. This is, well, some people would call it a grown-up Evo. A grown-up Evo, huh? We'll see about that. We caught up with Dale, the owner of this, frankly, crazy wagon, to hopefully answer some of our questions about the car.
How did I get into Legnums? When I was in my mid-20s, I was just driving around a Honda Orthea because cars got me from A to B. Like most people. My brother at the time was a bit more into cars, and he suggested that if you like wagons, you should try out a Legnum VR-4. And I didn't know anything about anything to do with cars at that point, so I just rocked into a dealership, like, can I try that please? And that was my first taste of a turbo full drive V6, and wow, what an experience. The bug had bitten, and that was me converted for life. So I started looking around, and I was a bit older and earning a bit more money. And I was like, I think I could actually look after a VR-4 these days properly. And a friend down in Christchurch had a car that he was wanting to sell to partially fund his project VR-4. And so I chatted to him about it, did a deal, and he had a somewhat modified version of Grimace at the time. And I've been trying to up the maintenance, replace parts, and improve it OEM style ever since.
Righto, let's get back to the car and take it for a drive. The Legnum VR-4 was overshadowed not only by its competition, but by its own peers. Other Mitsubishis of the time, the GTO, obviously the Evo, but even the FTO. History remembers them so much more strongly than this car. Now, is that deserved? Well, from where I'm sitting, there's a lot to like. Obviously, the engine itself, when it works, is a peach. It's a 2.5-litre V6 that, despite this one being quite heavily modified, still has plenty of torque down low. I can put it in third and put my foot down a little bit and it pulls. Officially, these Legnum and Galant VR-4s came out with the usual 276 horsepower. At the crank, realistically you'd have been lucky to get that. At the wheels, these were making just over 200 horsepower. This one, whoa! This one makes 400. And I assure you, in this car, that's enough.
Now, it is no secret that these have a bit of a reputation on the used market. Dale is no stranger to what it takes to keep these complex cars on the road.
Maintenance-wise, it's just been every few years, something dies in it. I think the first thing to go was the rear diff. So AYC in these things, it's similar to an early model Evo. It just died on the motorway cruising home one day. Looked around for a range of upgrades, and what I eventually settled on with some discussion on the forums and Adam, who's possibly the most knowledgeable person with these cars in the country, we settled on a super active yaw control diff from a Evo 9. And that was just the nice balance between street ability and strength for any abuse that it might get handed.
So, let's not beat around the bush. This is a pretty heavily modified example of a Legnum VR-4. What exactly has Dale been up to?
Not too sure what year it was. It went in for a waff and it never really came back. It was smoky because 25-year-old turbo V6, it's going to get that way over time. So I looked around for a range of options, and that's when you come into a real dilemma with these vehicles. They don't have a high value in the aftermarket. And so I hemmed and hard, like, do I really want to take the next step on refreshing the motor in this? Because you know this is going to be expensive. I talked to my wife, she okayed it in principle because it is a big financial decision to replace one of these motors. So I went down that journey, did a range of options. Coincidentally, it turned out that Adam down in Christchurch, who I've mentioned before, had a spare recently rebuilt motor that was just sitting there waiting to go into his project car that he let go. Coincidental timing, but it was great for me. I may have picked up the only available recently rebuilt motor in the world. And that was a slippery slope because I made the foolish decision to go with hybrid turbos. These have a very, very tiny turbo in them. There is no options in the aftermarket to really replace with bolt-ons. So reconditioning these turbos was going to work out to be basically the same cost as the best high flows you can get from TME Australia. So I went with that option. That came with a number of rabbit hole type upgrades to go with it, because at that point your injectors need upgrading, actuators needed to be put on the turbos, and then I ran into a problem with well, not the tuner wasn't a problem, but he just could not get the ECU to reflash like it's supposed to. At some point we just decided to bite the bullet and go with a Link. It has all the features I'd ever want. This isn't a race car, it's not doing fancy drag days or anything like that, so a relatively modest Link was a good option for me. Let's just say I did not get much change from about 30k on that, so be warned if you're thinking about buying one of these and the engine decides to go on you. If you're not prepared to do all this yourself, this will be expensive.
So, what is a heavily modified Legnum VR-4 really like to drive?
There it is. Down low, below about 3,000 RPM, it's all lag. You still have a little bit of that V6 torque, but as soon as you get over about 335, you are hit with a wave of torque. Now Dale did say he wasn't aiming for some modern BMW-like twin-turbo efficiency. He wanted something raw and very 90s. He's definitely achieved that. That turbo is addictive. The noise is almost industrial. I'll be frank and I'll say I wouldn't call it good, but I do enjoy it. It's like it's gargling on nails. shifts. The throws are long, there's no getting around that. It's very 90s Mitsubishi, which is going to be a theme of a lot of this review. But they're precise enough. I don't know if this particular car has modified bushings. It feels like it might. There's still a bit of play, but nothing like what you'd get in a late 90s, early 2000s Legacy V4 as an example. It's a 5-speed, not a 6, which there weren't that many 6-speeds around at the time, but it would be cool to see a 6-speed in this. It feels like it could use it. But overall, it feels pretty good. Now on the windier stuff, I'm pretty impressed. You really have to move that wheel. It's not a case of the handling's bad, because it's really, really good. It grips, well, like a 90s Japanese wagon shouldn't, quite frankly. But I'll come right out and say it. It's pretty vague. The steering is very light, relatively dead on center. There's some weight to it as you extend. Around about 90 degrees, you start to feel the weight coming through, but I wouldn't say it's communicating with me. I'm aware of what the car is doing through the seat, through the pedals, through just the shifting of gravity, but the steering itself, it's not telling me much. If you've driven almost any Mitsubishi product from the 90s, you've kind of driven this with the steering. And you really do have to turn it. You probably can't really tell in shot, but the wheel is enormous as well. It's a bit of a throwback to this era. They were all 4-spoke, and they were all gigantic. Looking back from modern cars, this feels like a little bit of a truck wheel. But I can't hold that against it. It's of its era, and if you've driven a GTO, it's exactly the same. So this particular VR-4 has obviously been heavily modified, and part of that includes the suspension. Considering how low it is, and I'll be honest, I have scraped it a few times, it's pretty comfortable. It's not a modern GT, but it's pretty good. It's smooth enough, relatively well damped, very little body roll. I'd be happy daily driving this. Speed bumps would scare me. But you win some, you lose some.
When you drive this car, you can really tell that it's been built with a particular philosophy in mind. I'll let Dale explain that one.
At some point, and I have absolutely no idea when this occurred to me, I discovered I had collected a bit of a spec list of what these cars can come with from the factory. I believe Trigger Mauve Purple is the colour on this. It's a facelift, it's a manual, it's the wagon, a Recaro interior. At some point I just cottoned onto this idea of what if I could gather and put on this car every optional component I possibly could. This car's never intending to be the most powerful VR4 in the world or the most heavily modified. The guys over in Australia are pushing massive, insane numbers at the moment, so there's no keeping up with them. But I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could have the largest collection of parts that you could throw at one of these things? So I started on a bit of a journey to collect all the things that I could find that were missing from this. So it's got the glass 2-piece headlights. It has got the carbon trim interior for the sort of the fascia panel, the cargo net, which is an optional extra. I'm lucky I got the tonneau cover. No one likes to think of that as a thing, but once you're starting to collect little bits and bobs, not having that really drives people crazy. So one of the good things about these cars is you can steal a number of parts off other Mitsubishis. The Brembo's off an Evo, wheels off an Evo. The blow valve is the metal version that replaces the plastic one this came with. It's off an Evo, I'm not sure what model. The washer jets, which are possibly the best mod I've ever done to this car, are off a Mitsubishi 380. The interior I stole off a Viento, I believe, which I bought for just a few $100s because they're worth nothing. And I just updated my interior to be a bit of a bluey purple to match this. I grabbed Recaros from Japan, which it turns out there's a good chance those are absolutely brand new, which was just my good fortune. So just slowly improving things as we go. The things I like about OEM Plus is the aesthetic. It's not putting massive wings on it, although I have put a super VR-4 wing on this, which is absolute heresy for some in my community, but I love it. I saw it on a guy on Australia, and I was like, that's awesome, I want that. At this point, I think I've got Grimace here to a point where you could somewhat say that a VR-4, or an 8th gen VR-4, I like to think of it as a 3/4 of a GTR, for about a quarter of the price. They do similar numbers. I guess this is most comparable to an R33. They might be a little bit heavier, but they're full drive, 2.5. They are a 6-cylinder turbo. So one can sort of make the argument they're sort of a undiscovered car. We are hoping that because they are coming into America now, they'll get a bit more attention. So hopefully some parts might start being provided. If anyone is interested, an off-the-shelf turbo solution would be fantastic. Borg Warner, I'm looking at you. No, I'm just kidding.
Dale did say, from his perspective, this is 3/4 of the experience of a GDR for 1/4 of the price. Now, the big caveat on that, as we know, he has spent a reasonable sum of money on this car. This is not a stock VR-4, and I imagine a stock VR-4 would not drive like this. Is it 3/4 of an experience of a GDR? Ooh. It's getting there. It really is getting there. I've got the most experience in the R33 GDR. Similar era to this, and similar reputation of being the boat of the lineup. It isn't, by the way, the R33. It gets a very bad rap. In some ways, this does feel quite similar. But comparing the chassis of the two, it is no contest really. The R33 GDR takes it all day long. But 3/4, I could see it. I could see it. The engine, compared to the GDR, well, power delivery wise, yeah, actually quite similar. Smoothness? No. The straight 6 in the GDR, noise-wise, smoothness-wise, it's no comparison. But I wouldn't kick this out of bed. I've been doing a lot of windy driving, and these seats are doing a pretty good job. Dale's got these beautiful Recaros in, which, if you didn't know, you would just assume came with the car. The whole mantra of this car has been OEM Plus. I'm a big fan of OEM Plus. About the interior in general, it's 90s Mitsubishi. But it's not bad. It's definitely a big step up from a Lancer of this age. I used to own a non-Evo late 90s Mitsubishi Lancer, and this feels like the next step up in the product line. It's not a Mercedes or anything, but the materials are pretty nice. They've held up over time. There are no cracks in the dash or anything like that. It's even got a little display for your climate control. I remember when I saw these as a kid, I was always very curious about the little TV. I thought that was the pinnacle of technology. I was very easily impressed. When you try and settle down, when you slow it down a bit, put it into a higher gear, and just cruise, it does an adequate job. It does an adequate job. I'm reasonably comfortable. It's got not a lot of torque down low, but enough that I'm never searching for it. It's a bit boomy in here. Aftermarket exhaust, of course, but not unbearable. It wants to be going quickly. It wants you to drop it down a notch and open it up. And it rewards you, it really does. So many modern turbocharged cars, they try to give you that low down torque, and that's great. But then when you go searching for more, the top of the rev band has nothing for you. This isn't like that. This car wants to rev. It's a rare thing for a car to be fun at 3,500, but then also reward you for getting up to 6.5, 7.
Now, come on. We all know that a modified car is never truly finished. What plans has Dale got in store for future?
Cooling. That's my next target. Having a really expensive engine replacement, I don't want it to die the first track day I experience. Suspension, I've got teens on this. Recently I've found myself a little, not so much disappointed, it's just that New Zealand roads aren't the greatest in places, and these will hit bump stops pretty aggressively on the odd pothole.
Just hit the bump stops.
Quality of life is a factor.
Now, that's all well and good, but Dale has something a little crazier in mind.
There is one OE item that is very, very difficult to figure out after the fact, and that's the sunroof. It's a really large sunroof in these cars, which is one of the things I love about these vehicles. It's so large they decided to rebrand it to a moonroof. You've got two options. The first is reskinning the roof. That runs into all the complexities you could imagine. Getting the roof skin and sunroof, not a problem. Preparing the car for this, not a problem. But what happens when your welder, because it won't be this guy, blows a hole through a spot weld? You're pretty much done for at that point, and you'll have to start again. In a crazy freak coincidence, a friend elsewhere in the country had his VR-4 stolen. It was never recovered, and he was looking for a replacement car. At the exact same time, I was scrolling through TradeMe. I saw a facelift silver wagon that looked in pretty good condition for its age show up at a very reasonable price. So I contacted my friend and said, hey, do you want to do something kind of batshit insane? So we got to work on the math and the logistics of buying a car in Nelson, me driving elsewhere in the country to swap every single part from Grimace over to what will be my new silver car, and the math worked out. So we proceeded with that deal. That car is now with my friend, and I'm driving down to do a mammoth weekend of swapping parts over. So at the end result, Grimace will be with a new owner, and I will have a silver VR-4 facelift manual with a sunroof.
Okay, so we have firmly established that Dale is the best kind of madman. Time for some final thoughts on this car that he's created.
You know, growing up, these Legnum VR-4s and the Galant VR-4s themselves were a little bit of a joke. It's not that we thought they weren't capable in some way, but they always seemed to be owned by people that weren't quite set up to take care of them. They were abused. The amount of Galant and Legnum VR-4s you would see come up for $2,000 or $3,000 on TradeMe in the rattiest condition, you stop taking them seriously. You just think, oh, it's going to be another Legnum, it's going to be abused, it's going to have noisy tappets. Spoiler alert, they all have noisy tappets. It's going to be on its last legs, and it's going to cost me a fortune to maintain. Well, there's no denying this one's cost Dale a fortune to maintain. But he is one of the rare owners that's put the time, the effort, the money in. And I think it's rewarded him. I really do think. He has polished the proverbial turd here and found the amazing 90s Superwagon that's been hidden in plain sight in front of us this whole time. To badly paraphrase Top Gear, This is the Galant VR-4, the Evo, the 3/4 of a GDR that you know and love. But this time the dog can come too.